We have folks here from East West Players Community means support and care. We have Boys and Girls Club from Garden Grove, KYCC, New Start Housing Corporation, Boys and Girls Club.
Yeah, thanks, Jenny. I think we're gonna kick it off. Sorry, I think Rochelle Rios, our managing director, is gonna kick us off with the welcome and thank you all for being here.
Good morning, everyone. And again, a big thank you to everybody for joining us today. I'm so glad to see so many dedicated leaders who really care deeply about the well-being and the safety of our young people in LA and across the state. I'm Rochelle Rios, a member of the incredible ExpandLA team. All of our members are on this call. We are honored to be co-hosting this important information session on immigration, policies and protections with the California After School Advocacy Alliance, also known as CA3. Shortly, I will introduce a CA3 representative to briefly share about the statewide coalition representing the interests of children, youth, and families who rely on publicly funded expanded learning programs throughout the state. But before we begin today's presentations, we just want to take a moment to honor the memory of Jocelyn Rojo Carranza, an 11-year-old girl from Texas whose life was tragically cut short earlier this month due to the fear that she felt and the pain that was caused by bullying and threats against her family because of their immigration status. Jocelyn's story is a heartbreaking reminder of why our work matters, why we must continue to advocate, to protect, and to create safe spaces for immigrant youth and families. So in her memory, and in solidarity with the immigrant youth and families we serve throughout the state, I would like to ask for all of us to take a moment of silence. Let her memory inspire us to stand stronger in our commitment to justice and to compassion and inclusion. Today, as we discuss the rights and protections available to our communities, we do so in her honor, ensuring that no child should ever have to live in fear for their safety or for their family's safety. May Jocelyn rest in peace, and may our work carry forward her legacy. So now I'm just going to transition into who we are as an organization, especially for some of you who might be unfamiliar with ExpandLA. We are a nonprofit intermediary organization, and as an intermediary, we connect nonprofit youth-serving organizations with each other for greater collaboration, resource sharing, leveraging opportunities. We also support nonprofit organizations in the form of professional learning opportunities. We also work to strengthen the workforce through capacity building and creating career pathways into the expanded learning sector. But another important focus of our work is advocacy, and our advocacy efforts at all levels of government focus on amplifying the needs of the expanded learning sector, protecting and expanding critical funding streams, and shaping policies that lift up the sector. We recognize the challenges that many of our communities are facing right now during this very tumultuous time, and we deeply appreciate your commitment to ensuring that immigrant youth and families feel safe and they feel supported and empowered. So as policies continue to shift and the political climate is changing, the role of youth-serving nonprofits has never been more critical, more vital. The work you do every day provides not just education and enrichment, but it also really gives our young people a sense of stability, families a sense of advocacy, and a belonging for countless again, youth and families that are having to navigate a lot of this uncertainty. Today's session is designed to provide all of you with up-to-date insights on immigration policies, legal protections, and best practices for responding to this evolving landscape. We're honored to have expert speakers who are going to share their knowledge on the latest executive orders and policy changes, as well as practical strategies to help your organization stay informed and equipped. And our goal is for you to leave this session with a clearer understanding of your rights, responsibilities, and also the available resources that are out there, so that together we can continue to build safe, inclusive, and supportive environments for all youth. So thank you again for your time, your unwavering commitment to serving and protecting our communities. I now have the pleasure of introducing Jen Dietrich, Policy Director for Partnerships for Children and Youth. She is also representing our co-host organization, CA3. Jen, you want to take it away?
Thank you, Rochelle, and good morning to you all. Jen Dietrich, Director of Policy at the Partnership for Children and Youth. As Rochelle said, we help coordinate CA3, the California After School Advocacy Alliance, really trying to be the voice to lift up the students and families who count on local, state, and federally funded expanded learning opportunities, as well as the workforce that makes these programs so impactful. Your communities, we know your communities count on you for so much right now, even more so. And the trust and the relationships that you all have built with students and families are unmatched. We're really grateful for this space and this opportunity to understand how we can best protect our kids and families during this unprecedented time. So yeah, thank you for the partnership and the opportunity to figure out what more we can do. Thanks, Rochelle.
Wonderful. Thanks, Jen. I'm now going to turn over the mic to our incredible Jenny Marroquin, who is our Director of Policy and Advocacy.
Wonderful. Thank you, Rochelle. Good morning, everyone. Buenos dias. My name is Jenny Marroquin, Program Director and Director of Policy and Advocacy with ExpandLA. Pronouns a, she. Really great to be here with everybody. Thank you all for joining us in this really important conversation. I'm going to be going over the presentation overview just to share a little overview of what we're going to be covering today. We're going to be having our first presenter from Public Counsel with Ritu, covering the federal immigration policies and legal rights and responsibilities of youth serving nonprofits. Then we're going to jump into a best practices space with Danny and Brandy, who will be representing Woodcraft Rangers and All People's Community Center, to share what are best practices that organizations are taking to ensure that they're creating safe spaces for their staff and for communities. Then we're going to be having a space that is going to allow us to get an insight to our California immigration policies and most updated information from Attorney General Rob Bonta's office, the Deputy Director Maheen, and then Special Assistant to the Attorney General on Immigration, Jacqueline, will be joining us. So in our next slide, I'm going to be going over the structure just to support folks as you all are hearing information. Each organization, a group of folks are going to be doing their presentation. Feel free to add questions in the chat so that we gather the questions. We're going to be having a followed Q&A facilitated by 2 of our staff members. They'll be gathering the questions and raising trends from that to support with trying to address as many questions as possible. Something to note is because we want to make sure that we get to share the information that the presenters are bringing, we might not get to all the questions, but we will be recording the session and we will be following up with an email where if there were questions that were not answered, we will be creating a Q&A afterwards and working with presenters to make sure that we have those questions answered. So hopefully that helps with making sure that if you have questions but they weren't answered, they will be afterwards. So with that, we're going to open up our first space with federal immigration policies and legal rights and responsibilities of youth serving nonprofits. To share a little bit more of our first presenter, Ritu Mahajan Estes is the directing attorney of Public Counsel's Community Development Project. Previously, she served as a supervising senior staff attorney within the project, where she led its small business and early care and education initiatives. During her 15 years at Public Counsel, Ritu has engaged in direct legal services, litigation, and policy advocacy to help create healthy, inclusive, and vibrant communities and build power in communities of color. As a senior supervising staff attorney, Ritu led Public Counsel's efforts to provide legal services to hundreds of low-income small business owners across LA County each year. She oversaw the delivery of these services in multiple languages and has worked to ensure our services are fully accessible. In the aftermath of the pandemic, she successfully negotiated settlement agreements for business owners negatively impacted by COVID that involved the waiver of thousands of dollars in rent debt and defending clients in frivolous and impermissible unlawful detainer and breach of contract lawsuits. Ritu is a member of the Small Business Alliance for Equitable Communities and the State Small Business Coalition. In addition, she is a past co-chair of the Access and Inclusion Subcommittee of the Los Angeles County Children Care Planning Committee and past member of the Long Beach Early Childhood Education Committee. Ritu received her BA in Economics and Political Science from UC Irvine and her JD from UC Berkeley Law School. So I welcome Ritu to our space. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for being here today. I know I don't have a lot of time and there's a lot of things to cover. Just want to say that some of the information I'm going to be sharing can be, heavy, serious, sort of triggering to hear. And so I just am recognizing that and acknowledging that. And um, but I do feel like it's important for you all to have this information because the more education and information we have, the more empowered we are to assert our rights when possible. So I apologize in advance if some of the things I'm going to discuss, may trigger some kind of response in you, but I hope that the information's useful. So I was asked to just quickly talk about some of the executive orders that relate to immigration. So I'm just going to cover them really quick. And I can put in a chat a really good chart that the Council of Nonprofits has put together on all the executive orders, broken by subject area. But basically, as you know, everyone here knows, the administration has issued a few executive orders related to immigration. One being, of course, their stepped up enforcement actions against undocumented immigrants in terms of attempting to remove them from this country. Also, their threats to, withhold federal funding from cities that they believe are sanctuary cities, cities that they believe are protecting immigrants. Also, threats to withhold federal funds to organizations that support and help undocumented people. They, of course, also initially, I think within the first week, the president had signed an executive order saying that he wanted to end birthright citizenship. Um, Immediately, many organizations sued the administration over that order, and there's quite a few judges now that have put a hold on that, basically saying it's unconstitutional. Imagine the administration will be appealing those judicial decisions, but for now, order is on hold. And there's been other orders related to basically this the administration's sort of affirmation that they do not want undocumented people to be able to access public benefits, and they want to kind of be scrutinize the delivery of those benefits more closely to make sure, undocumented people are not accessing these benefits. So, it's a really hard time right now. I know a lot of undocumented people, and then our organizations which serve these people, um, are feeling the effects. And um, I really applaud you all for being here today and for doing what you can to stand up for our clients and our communities, and trying to, protect them to the extent possible. Um, so I'm here, mostly to talk about like our rights when it comes to immigration enforcement, um, particularly the rights of nonprofits and small businesses and really just anybody. We all have constitutional rights regardless of our immigration status. Um, and I'm going to be going over those today. And we did this training in January. I have the webinar recording of the full training, which I can share with you all. It's in English and Spanish. And we've also developed like a 20-page FAQ on this topic, because of course we get a lot of questions about, I run a nonprofit that provides childcare, and I run a nonprofit that, I'm a healthcare provider or an affordable housing provider, and people have specific questions to their type of program. We also get a lot of questions about what am I to do if we're hosting like a community event or an event, in an open public space, what are our rights? So happy to take questions, when it comes time for that. Next slide, please. So just really quick, in terms of data storage, and record keeping, just big picture, I want you all to remember that like we should all be mindful of this. We do not want to be storing data about clients or staff that we don't need. So for example, if you don't need a client's immigration status, ITIN number, things like that, you shouldn't be collecting that information. And I say that because if you have the information, it's possible that immigration agents could serve your agency with a warrant or a subpoena, something that eventually could compel you to have to share the data. And so it's just best if you don't have the data. But I do understand that some organizations need the data to carry out their work. So, of course, there's no way to really get around that. And then the other thing to remember is when you are storing data, make sure that you have best practices in place as to how the data is going to be stored, and also how you're going to prevent disclosure. So if you're storing, digital files, are they password protected? Do you have measures in place to respond to any breach of that data? If you have physical files, how are you keeping them confidential and safe? So, all of us should be thinking about in our offices, if you have client files, we shouldn't be leaving the files open in our office just for anybody to walk by and see. We should have practices of putting physical files away in folders and putting them in a cabinet that you can lock when you leave. And this is because if immigration agents were to show up at your facility, and let's say they're walking the halls or they somehow are in areas where offices are, or even in the lobby, if they're in the lobby and they see things, just in what we call plain view, they do have access to those things, and they can seize those things, and they do not need a judicial warrant to basically search things that are in the plain view. So it's best to try to keep things confidential to the extent possible, and to have um, like measures in place to protect data. And Public Counsel actually has a sample data retention policy for those of you that operate nonprofits that don't have such a policy. I will also link it in the chat, and it's on our website. Next slide, please. So this is just for the folks that haven't ever met an immigration agent, where I'm sharing these visuals to show you what they sometimes look like and the kind of clothing they wear. So you see it says police, ICE, Department of Homeland Security. I think the other one says CBS. I can't see the picture, but yeah, so sometimes they appear like this. Sometimes, they even come in plain clothes. So it can be hard to tell if someone's an immigration agent sometimes. Sorry, it's a CBP. Yeah. But just sharing because this is what they may look like if you ever encounter one of these agents. Next slide, please. Also, these are like the types of badges and business cards that they would carry. And I'm sharing this because we all have a right, if someone presents themselves at our facility to ask, like, which agency are you with? And I'd like to see your credentials. We all have that right. And so I'm sharing this so you can see what the credentials might look like. Next slide, please. Okay, just quickly, I'm going to talk about I-9 audits and raids. So this is one way that immigration agents carry out enforcement activities, right? They conduct I-9 audits and raids. An I-9 form is a form that employees use to prove that they have work authorization, so that they're authorized to work in the United States. So any employer that has employees has to comply with the I-9 form requirement. They have to have their someone that they've hired fill out the I-9 form within 3 days of employing them, and attached to the form, the employee would also provide documentation that supports their sort of statement that they have authorization to work in the United States. So it's up to the employer to keep records of these I-9 forms. We recommend that you keep the forms separate from your payroll files, like from your personnel files. And what may happen, right? And I think we are suspecting more I-9 related audits and raids under this administration is, the normal process is the federal immigration agents would serve the employer with what we call a notice of inspection, which gives the employer 3 days to review the notice and respond. We recommend that employers take those full 3 days, call a lawyer, figure out how you want to respond, but do not waive your right to taking those 3 days. In those notice of inspection, they may ask for I-9 forms for XYZ employee. If they ask for such things, you're not required to then also give them, the employee's full personnel file, right? You want to try to keep things confidential to the extent possible. But if you do get this notice of inspection, please reach out to a lawyer and figure out how you want to respond. The other way that immigration agents carry out I-9 related inspections is through a raid, which is where they show up unannounced and they don't do a notice of inspection. We largely see these raids happen in places where immigration agents may suspect that there's a large amount of people that are working without work authorization. So for example, you might see a raid at a restaurant or at a car wash. Obviously raids can be very scary, traumatic, because basically, a bunch of ICE agents show up and they sort of like are right there in your face. Even in those situations, we all have rights, and the employer has rights as well as the workers. And so I will cover those in the next few slides. Next slide, please. This is just, I'm sure most of your nonprofits have an HR department or somebody that's in charge of making sure employees are filling out the I-9 forms. So there are obligations in terms of keeping these forms. These I-9 forms are not required for contractors that agencies work with. They're required for employees. And there is a time frame as to how long you have to keep the I-9s. And employers do have a responsibility to re-verify employees' work authorization if they know that it's going to expire. So for example, if someone working for you is under DACA and you know that their work authorization will expire this May, you as the employer do have an obligation to, as that date's coming up, to re-verify their work authorization. So again, these are things I've already kind of covered. I-9 audits can be based on complaints. They can be random, some suspicion that immigration agents have that there's undocumented workers. It's kind of hard to know what triggers the I-9 audits and raids. If you get that notice of inspection, like I said, take the 3 days. Don't waive your right to having those 3 days. If ICE shows up again, I'm going to go through this, but you have a right to ask them for judicial warrant. What kind of documentation do they have? And basically ask like why they're there. And if they do find unauthorized workers at your facility, they will give you as the employer 10 days to sort of provide other documentation that proves that these workers do have work authorization. If you're not able to provide that documentation, then unfortunately you have to make some tough decisions as the employer about whether you are going to terminate the workers or you're going to put them on some kind of leave until they're able to get work authorization. If the federal agents find that employers, are employing people who don't have work authorization, the nonprofit can be fined and, there's pretty high penalties. Next slide, please. Okay, so we all have these rights with respect to immigration enforcement. We have the right to stay silent. We have the right to ask for identification. We have the right to document and record, and we have the right to deny these immigration agents entry into private spaces if they do not have a signed judicial warrant. And we also have the right to ask them for supporting documentation. Next slide, please. So public counsel recommends that each nonprofit, for example, have a policy in place that gives staff direction on what to do if ICE shows up at their workplace, their facility, offsite clinic. It's a really good idea to have a policy because these things are scary. They can be, they can provoke, they can elicit anxiety in us. And it's just, if you have a policy in writing, it helps because then you know exactly what to follow. And it just makes sure everybody is on the same page. And once you have a policy, you of course want to train your staff to make sure they understand how to implement the policy. In our FAQ, which I'll share in the chat later, at the end of it, we have sample policies. Public counsel's we've been helping nonprofits work on their policies. We provide free legal services, my project does, to low-income small business owners as well as nonprofits that are serving low-income communities. So if you need help with your policy, you can reach out. And we have an online application where you can apply for our services. Next slide, please. So again, it's good to have a policy. It's a useful tool. It encourages discussion and agreement, and it reassures staff of their protections. Next slide, please. Okay, so every policy will have a scope. It'll have information about different, employee roles. It'll talk about public versus private spaces and what to do if law enforcement or immigration agents show up. Next slide, please. So there should be a scope, right? Like where does this policy apply? Does it just apply to our main office? Does it apply to all of our sites? What's the scope of it? And then you also want to have language in there about the different staff roles. So for example, public counsel's policy basically says that if ICE is at our facility, we are to ask them to wait outside, right? If they're not already in, and our staff will let them know, I'm not authorized to speak with you. I need you to wait outside. I'm contacting what we call our authorized person. They're on their way, right? And each agency, like public counsel, has designated 4 people that are public counsel's authorized people. So this staff person will call, all those people, tell them that ICE is outside at the office, and have them come down and talk to ICE. Now, this authorized person is going to have that job to basically ask ICE, do you have a judicial warrant? And to review that warrant and to to confirm whether or not that warrant gives ICE the right to enter the office. So each agency should have people that feel comfortable doing this and that staff can call on if ICE does show up. The policy should address all interactions with law enforcement, not just ICE, because as I said, sometimes they show up in plain clothes and you're not really sure which agency are they from. Next slide, please. So in your policy, you will have language about public versus private spaces. The reason for this is under the 4th Amendment, which gives us all protection against unreasonable searches and seizures. The law says that we can require immigration agents to provide us a judicial warrant if they want to enter private spaces. Now, people always ask me, well, what's a private space versus a public space? Well, a private space is a space where we have a reasonable expectation of privacy, both objectively and subjectively. So, for example, in a bathroom, right? In your bathroom stall, you have a reasonable expectation of privacy. In my office, where I meet clients, I have a reasonable expectation of privacy. However, on the street, I don't, right? Because anybody can walk on the street. It's not reasonable for me to expect that my interactions there are private. Same thing in like a park, for example. So every facility has, components of it that are public and private. And it matters now more than ever, whether something's public or private, because as I've been saying, ICE does need a judicial warrant to enter private spaces, and you can mandate that they have one. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Okay, so this comes up a lot about lobbies. So public counsel has a lobby, and we do make people buzz in to enter our lobby. And we consider our lobby private because not everybody gets buzzed in, right? If you buzz at the outside door, we only let you in if you have an appointment and you're a client, for example. So we consider our lobby private for that reason. We also have on our front door a lot of signs that say private, authorized personnel only, law enforcement not permitted behind these doors. So all of those factors help us feel comfortable in the determination that our lobby is a private space. Other clients I've met with have told me, well, yes, we do make people buzz in to go to our lobby, but we let anybody in. Or our doors are open, so anybody can come in, right? So in those situations, it's harder to argue that your lobby is a private space. And theoretically, ICE agents could come into the lobby and hang out there. But even still, even if they get into your lobby and they're there, you do not need to let them into the private parts of your office without a judicial warrant. So by that, I mean, like, let's say they're hanging out in the lobby, but then at some point you have like a door that leads into the hallway that goes to the private offices. Whoever's interacting, the authorized personnel who's interacting with them can basically tell ICE, you're here in the lobby, we need to see your judicial warrant because we're not going to let you into the private spaces without that warrant. Next slide, please. So if you do have an encounter with ICE, most importantly, do not lie. You have the right to remain silent. You should follow the policy that your organization has provided you about how to interact with law enforcement agents. The general policy, again, is they may not enter without a judicial warrant. And you want to make sure your policy lists some authorized people that can play that role of interfacing with ICE. This person needs to be familiar with the different types of warrants and subpoenas. They need to be comfortable checking the date, location, and scope of the warrant. They need to be comfortable asking ICE for their credentials. And, you want to have a few people, because what if one authorized person's unavailable, right? Then you can go to number 2. Next slide, please. Okay, so these are just key phrases to remember, and it helps to say them out loud. So essentially, stay calm, don't run, contact the authorized person, inform the agents. If a staff member at public counsel sees ICE outside, inform them, you do not have permission to enter non-public areas without a judicial warrant. Ask them to stay, in the designated area, preferably outside. Have the authorized person inspect the documentation that ICE provides. If they don't have a warrant, continue to stick with the verbiage. We have a policy of denying access without a valid judicial warrant. If they do have a warrant, then you have to double check, what does the warrant say? And let's say the warrant is valid, it is a judicial warrant, then you want to check what's the scope of it. And you want to make sure the ICE agents abide by that scope. So even if they have a valid judicial warrant to check out an office or whatever, I'm not just going to let them go around everywhere, right? I'm going to follow them, and I'm going to document and record what they're doing. And I'm going to make sure they're staying within the bounds of the warrant. Next slide, please. So, okay, this is another important distinction. the rule about they need a judicial warrant to enter private spaces, it doesn't apply to administrative warrants. So I'll tell you first, a lot of times ICE agents don't have any warrants. Okay. And then if they do have a warrant, it's often an administrative warrant. An administrative warrant doesn't give ICE the right to enter private spaces. They need a judicial warrant. Administrative warrants, I know it's kind of hard to see, they're issued by an immigration agency. And see at the top here, it says U.S. Department of Homeland Security. They do not authorize a search of non-public areas. Next slide, please. Judicial warrant, which is the warrant that does authorize, search of private areas, is signed by a judge, by a judicial court. See, it says United States District Court. It lasts 14 days, so there's a time frame on it, and it'll be signed by a judge. So yes, you do need to comply with signed judicial warrants that are valid and current, right? So if it's past the 14 days and it's expired, then you don't need to comply. But there's certain things you need to look for on the warrant. Next slide, please. Okay. Again, just reiterating, staff saying, I do not consent to your entry. General principles, do not have staff provide ICE with documents or information or engage in unnecessary conversation. But of course, also do not put yourself in harm's way, right? We can assert our rights. We can tell ICE, we need you to have a judicial warrant to enter the private space. But if they barge in, don't get in front of them and put yourself in harm's way. If they do that, all you can do is record and document. And the reason we record and document is because it's possible that later that evidence that we've gathered can be used against ICE. Okay, so this is asked a lot too. So what if your lobby is a public space, right? Or even at public council, we consider our lobby a private space, but what if ICE somehow gets in, like someone accidentally lets them in? If they're in the lobby, what we're going to do is we're going to have red cards available for everybody in the lobby. And we're also going to tell people you have the right to remain silent and you don't have to answer questions from the agent. We're allowed to tell people that. However, we cannot tell people do not speak to the agent. I know it's kind of a fine line, but basically you're not allowed to tell them what to do. You can just tell them you have a right to remain silent. And that's why the red cards are helpful, because it has all this information. And again, you can document the interaction. And also adding that for us, what we're also doing, just to share as an example, if we know ICE is outside and we have people in our lobby and we're not sure if ICE will somehow come in, we are going to move everybody from our lobby into our private offices to provide another, sort of more protection for them. And you have to be careful because yes, you can let people know their rights. Yes, in that situation, we feel we can move them into the private offices because at that point, we don't know why ICE is there. But you cannot, help people flee. If that's the person that ICE is there for, you cannot obstruct ICE. So I know, again, it's kind of a fine line. Yeah, next slide, please. So these are key phrases. I'm not authorized to speak with you. I do not want to answer any of your questions. Do you have a warrant? Please pass it under the door. I do not consent to your entry. Am I being detained? Am I free to go? I do not give you permission to search me. I do not want to talk to you until I talk to a lawyer. Next slide, please. Again, we all have a right to document and record. You want to make sure if you're recording, get the date and time, how many officers, their names and badge numbers, take a photo of it, document what they said and why they were there, document whether they presented a warrant and what happened next. Next slide, please. Yeah, I'm sorry. I know I'm talking kind of a lot. Do we want to break to do questions or should I keep going?
We've been gathering questions, so you
Okay.
can continue to go and then we'll go into the questions.
Okay. So of course, if you are going to have a policy, You want to make sure you can work with the lawyer to develop it, right? And for some nonprofits, you'll need your board to approve it. Not all, every nonprofit kind of functions differently in terms of the board's involvement. And you want to conduct trainings for your staff, right? Tell them this is the policy, here's why we're doing this. Do some role playing, um, and help them feel comfortable with it. Next slide, please. And of course, if there is a raid or audit, it can be very stressful and traumatizing. So you want to make space for your staff to debrief and discuss what happened. You want to offer leave to people if they need it. Like I said, if you do need to terminate employees, for example, because they didn't have work authorization, you want to make sure you're paying them promptly, offering them leave if that's possible. And you also want to, of course, stay connected to the community's immigration response efforts. Next slide, please. Okay, so yeah, I'm sorry. I know I had to rush through a lot of really heavy information, but I hope this is helpful.
Ritu, thank you so much. That was incredibly helpful information and a lot packed in. I'm still trying to process it, but we're really grateful to have you and your expertise with us. We do have a couple of questions that were included in the chat, and this one is interesting, and in some respects you may have answered it, but someone asked, what level do public school campuses fall into in the public versus private space?
Yeah, so I mean, I think some of you have seen the California Attorney General has issued like different guidance for different types of programs. So there's one for schools, there's one for healthcare providers, and I'm happy to put it in the chat. And, of course, different schools, districts are taking different approaches, but from what I've seen of LUSD, for example, is the policy seems to be, we're not going to let ICE agents into our campuses unless they have a judicial warrant. Um, and I've seen that same policy being enforced, for example, in Chicago, where there already has been a lot of ICE activity. So yeah, I mean, I guess ICE could theoretically hang out outside, but whether or not they're allowed to come inside, we would demand that they have a judicial warrant. And even still, right, then an authorized person, I guess here the principal would review the warrant and understand whether it's valid and current, and also what is the scope of what it allows.
Thank you so much for that. We have one more question. How does the reasonable expectation of privacy clause apply to our neighbors living outside?
Yeah, that's a good question. I haven't been asked that before, but um
You can certainly
yeah.
take some
Yeah.
time, and we can probably circle back with you and see if we
Okay.
can get an
Yeah.
answer and
Yeah.
provide it to our folks later.
Yeah. And one thing I want to quickly say, because I know we don't have a lot of time, is people ask me like, okay, what if we do a food bank, right? Once a month, our nonprofit hosts a food bank and all the community can come. It's in an open place, like a public place. What do we do if ICE shows up, right? And so it's harder obviously there because it's outside, it's a public area. But I still think in those circumstances, like if it were me, if public counsel was hosting something and I saw ICE at our event, I think I would talk to them and say, like, what's your purpose for being here? And I would basically respectfully ask them to leave. I'll let them know this is an event that we've sponsored and ask that they leave. And also ask if they do have a judicial warrant, because I just feel like what's the harm, right? In talking to them in that way. If they don't listen and they stay, you just want to make sure everybody who's attending has the red cards, that you have the rapid response numbers on hand that you can call if these ICE agents do arrest or detain somebody. And try to have these events inside if you can in private spaces, but I know that's not possible always, right? Because some of these events are really large and there's no like indoor private space to hold them. Um, I also encourage you guys to think about your physical offices and places where you do business and think about, where you can put up signage that says private, authorize only, to sort of delineate what the private spots are. The signage alone is not like everything, but it helps, right? And then you want to follow policies that make sure it is actually private and you're not just letting anybody into those private spaces.
I think we're at
You so
time,
much.
but there was one more question in the chat about can they
Um,
stay all day in the organization even if they don't have a warrant? And I think that might be time for the last question.
What was it? Can they stay?
All day in the organization even if they don't have a warrant.
I mean, no. I mean, I would just say like, you don't have a judicial warrant, so you can't be here, basically.
Could clarify, Marie, too. It's
Yeah.
more about their tactics, right? We know that they
Oh,
use
yeah,
ruses
yeah.
and things like that. Like if they don't have a warrant, they aren't leaving, can they, just kind of keep poking as long as they want?
I mean, if they were like in our offices at public counsel, I think I would just keep trying to say, this is private property. You need to leave. You don't have a judicial warrant to be here. They might go outside, I guess, and yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, if they're not going to follow any laws, they're not going to follow any laws. There's only so much you can do. But I think we would try to do our best to just keep reiterating, like, we need them to leave. And I don't know, I've thought about this too, like what I call the police, basically, to say they're trespassing, essentially. I'm not sure. I've thought about that, but yeah, but I mean, you don't want to you don't want to get hurt or put yourself in harm's way. So you can keep trying to let them know it's private property, they need to leave, they can go outside, things like that.
I think we're going to go ahead and move on to our next set of speakers. Thank you so much, Ritu.
Wonderful. And Marisa's gonna skip over the next two slides, but they will be there. These are additional resources that in conversation with public counsel, we thought were really helpful. So you all will get them in the follow-up email. And then the next slide also has a recording. We know that a lot of folks are interested in the Know Your Rights trainings and to provide more accurate, updated information to community and to staff. So we are working with Garesen and they created a website where they're going to be updating their Know Your Rights training. So we'll be able to share that in the follow-up email as well. Did I add another slide? Oh yeah. So moving into our next phase, we're going to be going into best practices and resources to support expanded learning organizations. And I'm going to introduce our first two, or our two presenters. Luis Danny Salas is from Woodcraft Rangers. He's the Chief Program Officer, leads diverse expanded learning programs, overseeing over 1,000 staff members, instrumental in the formation of partnerships that support inclusion of neurodiverse and LGBTQI A+ youth. Danny is recognized as an innovative leader in California's after-school enrichment arena, serving on multiple state committees and community groups, including the board of Rosemead Kiwanis and California's School Age Consortium. Brandy is the executive director of All People's Community Center. Her role as executive director started in July 2023. Brandy is an accomplished nonprofit leader with an extensive background in development and organizational growth. Born and raised in San Diego, Ms. Muñiz earned her Bachelor's of Arts in Political Science from San Francisco State University and is currently working on her master's. With over 12 years of experience in the nonprofit sector, she remains deeply committed to drive change, creating impactful solutions and strengthening communities. So I welcome Danny and Brandy. Thank you all so much for sharing some of your best practices. And we'll start off with Danny.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Jenny, and ExpandLA for providing this space for all of us. I think that when we started off the session today, the question was, what is community to us? And so I think this is a great example of community, being able to bring us together here to be able to share resources and best practices and have dialogue across our industry to be able to provide the best quality programs, safe environment for our staff and for our students. So I'll share a little bit about our best practices and what we've done over the last couple of weeks and months to support our staff, our students, and our families. Next slide, please. So for those of you not familiar, Woodcraft Rangers is a outdoor education expanded learning program. We've been around for about 100+ years. We have the honor of serving over 100 school sites across LA County from TK to 12th grade. And so with that, we also have the ability to collaborate with so many different communities. And so within that, our mission is to guide young people as they explore pathways to purposeful lives, which includes ensuring that we keep our families and students safe, provide an inclusive space, and provide enriching and learning environments. And so part of today's conversation that I'm going to share is what we've done to ensure that our number one, staff are equipped to be able to provide a safe space, be able to answer questions that come up if an immigration officer comes into one of our campuses, so they can collaborate within our school site leadership and be able to keep our students safe. Next slide, please. So early on in January, we developed our staff protocols for immigration enforcement. And I do want to thank Ms. Ritu, who just spoke, because we did use a lot of their resources to really develop our protocols in place. And so with that, we were able to designate a protocol that was streamlined across all of our school sites to ensure that, once again, programs are safe spaces for our families. And so that if immigration enforcement would come to any of our program locations, that the staff would be able to take the necessary steps to keep families safe. And so when we did this, we rolled out our training virtually to all of our site supervisors, managers, ensuring that they, number one, are the ones that are able to understand our protocols in place, which is a lot of the content that Ms. Ritu just talked about. So I'm not necessarily going to repeat, I'm going to highlight some areas. But what does that look like? And so for our program, for school dismissal, for which varies amongst our programs, we do have a designated individual, which we call community liaison, in front of our dismissal area, which allows for our staff to be able to check in parents as they are looking to sign out their students, pick up their students. And so it allows for us to have a entry checkpoint. Right. And so if there is an immigration officer interested in coming in, right, there's an immediate checkpoint after school that allows for us to be able to provide questions, proper documentation, and immediately sets a tone for a safe space, right, as we are able to ask those questions. And so with that, with this protocol, we were able to identify the process to verify credentials from the immigration officer, how to redirect requests for students or staff, and ensure that our leadership is involved in those conversations and only providing that approval. We did equip our staff to ensuring that they understand that they are not to disclose any information that is being requested unless approved only by our HR director or senior director and our executive director. And so those steps are clearly defined within our protocols to ensure that we are giving grace and being able to discuss those requests through our leadership department. Once we were able to provide training for our management team and supervisors, then we were able to trickle that training over to the site staff and club leaders, ensuring that they understand also the protocol and the steps that they will take to be able to reinforce that. We did send out this protocol, and after sending out this protocol, we were then able to also carry out parent information meetings to ensure that parents are also well informed of our steps to ensuring that there's alignment on the steps that we would take to keep their kids safe. We also had conversations with our partners, understanding their district protocols and then sharing our protocols so that there's full alignment within the steps, so that ultimately when we are speaking to families after schools, that they are able to understand what the protocols are going to be after school. And so there was some conversations that there were some inconsistencies or gray lines that we had to have conversations with partners just to create clarity on the steps that we would take. And gracefully, our partners were able and have been able to clarify those steps to ensure that our staff understand not to share or not to allow for any ICE agents to come into our sites, and how we can continue to keep our space safe. Next slide, please. So within our policy, our staff are not able to share any personal identifiable information, including immigration status, without any official approval, like I mentioned earlier. Within our procedure, a lot of the details that Ms. Ritu shared, we did cover our employees' responsibilities, supervisor and manager responsibilities, and then how we're also keeping safeguard of documentations. And so we do have our documents safe, ensuring that only site supervisors have access to this, which immediately gets submitted to us as a part of our attendance collection process, which immediately gets provided over to our data team. And then we also did share with our team, for example, what happens if one of our community liaisons or club leaders doesn't feel safe being in that current position where they might be the first contact with an ICE agent, right? And so being able to provide that flexibility to our staff so that they are not placed in an uncomfortable situation. We've been able to have some conversations or give that ability to our staff and give that flexibility. Ultimately, I think what we've been able to build within our sites is that there is an immediate checkpoint, and there is collaboration amongst our sites to ensuring that there's a streamline of communication. Next slide, please. In training our staff, we have also trained our staff and continue to train our staff on also getting our students involved in this process. And so ensuring that they understand how to best use their voice through our youth advisory programs is another component that we're adding to this, so that there is ongoing alignment. Training our students on being able to have these conversations around what it means to keep your program safe or keeping them safe. We have been having these conversations. Tomorrow, we are hosting our youth advisory workshop or summit to support our leadership programs within our middle schools and high schools, to support around advocacy and around leadership, really touching on what the ability around creating voice and continuing to be a part of the safe spaces for students. Knowing that this is a heavy moment for our families and for our students, we're also working with local mental health organizations like Chicago School of Psychology, who are working with us to begin to provide SEL support in addition to what we currently offer to help our students during this time. And then we've also compiled many resources around mental health for our staff, being able to understand that this can be a lot for them as well and their families. And so we want to make sure that our teams are being taken care of as well. We did also establish a Woodcraft Rangers task force working on compiling updated resources and being able to provide ongoing training that we can share amongst our organization, and how to timely provide those updates so that our team feels up to date, and then they can get the questions or more recent information that's coming out. Next slide. I do have a couple of resources here. A lot of resources here include red cards. We do have our resources in other languages as well, and still working on developing updates that you all can have. But I think a lot of the highlights that I want to share is that we have been using resources from public counsel and ensuring that we're streamlining not only our conversations with our staff, but with our families as well. And so you'll find this resource on our staff protocol that you can access and then use as needed if it's a helpful tool for you all. Once again, I want to thank ExpandLA for creating this space for us and giving us this time to just be able to share some of our best practices. With that, I'll say thank you very much, and I'll hand it over back to Rochelle or Jenny.
Wonderful. Thank you, Danny, so much. Feel free to drop your questions in the chat after the second presentation. We'll do the Q&A. But I do want to welcome Brandy for her presentation on All People's Community Center.
Thank you, Janie. Good morning, everyone. My name is Brandy Muniz, and I'm the Executive Director at All People's Community Center. And much like Danny just shared, I did attend the training for small businesses and nonprofits presented by Public Counsel. So I too used a lot of the information that was provided from that to create our own IE or immigration enforcement response plan, which I'll share about today. I've also been attending many different other Know Your Rights workshops, and so the plan includes a lot of information from those as well. Next slide, please. The what, where, why, and how of this plan. So a bit about All People's. We're an almost 83-year organization providing essential programs to our community who are experiencing high rates of poverty. We also have the most number of youth in our council district here, and we serve over 6,600 people annually through our programs like our youth services, which provide free after childcare, educational support, college prep, summer camps and programs, sports, cooking and wellness classes and field trips. We have community support for our adults through housing stability programs, case management, free tax assistance, along with immigration services through our partnership with Garesen, DV support groups and women's support groups, along with financial coaching and LAUSD, a person on staff to help our parents with that. And of course, we also have a food and wellness program. We have a garden on site, and we provide free food each week through a food pantry and a senior food delivery program. It's also important to note that 42% of our staff come from our program. So this plan was important not just to keep our community safe, but also our staff safe, especially because they are our community. So I've drafted a community response or an immigration enforcement plan that we went over together as a staff. And actually we had some staff member who weren't able to attend that meeting, so we're going over it again. And it was important that we had that so that we're prepared should ICE or immigration enforcement come up to the center. Next slide, please. That plan also incorporates all of our employees, our volunteers, interns, community members, even a few offsite staff that we have. It includes, what their responsibilities and responses would be should IE show up to the center. Next slide, please. What is covered in this training or plan? It's a whole, it's a presentation. And so I think it's important to note, what's in there to think about what your plan should potentially include. I did go over the executive orders and some of the language that the current administration uses, which I think is super important because it gives us a lot of insight into what to expect and what the administration is thinking. So it gives us a lot of details on how to prepare. Being informed, prepared, and sharing knowledge is power. That is how we can prepare ourselves, how we can become politically active, is knowing our rights and being prepared should ICE show up or any immigration enforcement show up to the building. And we know that this works because there's actually a video that I include in the training of this border czar who talks about how in Chicago, their NGOs were so prepared that people knew their rights, that centers and nonprofits knew their rights, and it actually helped them not make arrests. And so we know that if we're prepared, if we're sharing knowledge, and if we have the information we need, that we can protect our centers, our community members, and our staff, and that it works. We go over types of potential visits, just like Ritu said. Again, a lot of it is structured off of the information that Ritu provided, such as I-9, raids, tactics and attire of IE. It covers our rights, which is very important. Everyone should know, all staff, all community members, what are legitimate warrants, what those can look like, how we can tell what the differences are between the different ones. And of course, we go over private and public spaces, the distinction between the two and how we can prepare ourselves the best that we can. We've put up signs in the building. We've have gone over building access, which is a bit different for us as well. So before, for example, if someone wanted to come in and use the restroom, we would just welcome anyone into the center. But now we have a process of, prioritizing appointments or having a chaperone. We want to be mindful about who has access to the building. The plan itself also includes a policy that the board actually voted on and approved. And what that is it's just our commitment to the staff and to the center on what we should do should IE show up to the center. So it informs staff that we would not voluntarily provide their information to immigration enforcement. We would do our due diligence in storing data and things like that. There's also a piece that covers how to document interactions with IE. It is our right to be able to record or take notes. So there's a how to do that, the things that you can say to inform them that you are going to be recording. Like Ritu said, oftentimes they're not above breaking the law or trampling on people's rights. So it's important that we're capturing that information or documenting it, because that could be helpful to the center and to the community in the future. And lastly, it covers things not to do, such as, providing false information and things like that. Next slide, please. The plan itself is a step-by-step guide on what we should do specifically here at the center. So it is personalized. So Ritu public counsel gave us a very broad information. And so I use that to create a very specific plan to our building. Our access to the building is very different from, I'm sure, like Danny's or even public counsel. So I went through and thought of a plan, a communication plan, how staff can communicate with one another, how staff can communicate with community members, and what they should do if IE shows up and we're in the middle of an event or there's children in program, things like that. So I do highly recommend reading or watching the public counsel presentation, which I also have a link of that, which I'm sure they'll provide, but I will share that. We'll also be including drills and practicing and enforcing what we've learned through this plan. And actually this morning, there was immigration enforcement in the neighborhood, not that far off from us. So we were able to use some of this knowledge that we've implemented to prepare. We brought our food program inside. We communicated to staff so they, close their doors and they're just prepared. And so it's very important that everyone is having these conversations with their staff members that should something happen. We also don't want community members, freaking out and running away, because again, running can be seen as a form of something that ICE can enforce against, and two, it could give them access to like public spaces. And so we want to make sure that our community members are aware of what that means and are prepared. Let's see, next slide, please. Resources for staff. It also, the plan itself also includes printouts. We've, of course, designated staff on who can communicate or who should be the ones communicating with IE should they show up. Not everyone can, that's in the policy. And then people are going to be verifying if there is a warrant, what kind of warrant, is it legitimate? So it has printouts of what a legitimate warrant looks like and what ones don't, and what you should be looking for, as well as giving staff access to that. They also have the plan and policy. And one thing I was very concerned to learn about was that since immigration law is civil, people are not entitled to free, or not entitled, not even to free, but to legal counsel because it's a civil case. So I've secured, we've partnered with a Marigold law firm who's providing free consultations to our staff should they need them. And from there, if the law firm would like to proceed with the case, and if the staff member would like to also proceed with the case, they have to, obviously, this is private representation, so they would have to pay essentially a deposit or a retainment fee of $150. And so I haven't told my staff yet, and I know there's some on this call, but I have secured a sponsor who will cover that $150 retainment fee to help ensure that employees who need or want that service have access to legal counsel so that they're prepared. And then, of course, thinking about their families, currently working out resources so that their families, staff member families, can also have access to legal resources should they need them. Next slide, please. Still more to come. Obviously, this plan is just what happens for our immediate response. There's still a lot that we have to do at the programmatic level. What to do if, how to communicate to parents, how to communicate to like our food program staff today. So we brought everyone inside, everyone was seated, and we had to have a conversation with them again to remember their rights, to understand the differences between public and private spaces. So just how to have those conversations. Do we need to change our programs in any way, such as bringing food program inside all the time, or is it just in an emergency response like this? So there's those conversations that we still need to have. What about events, right? And so we're having those conversations at our leadership level, and then also obviously including our community for that. So I was actually able to talk to our women's group this past week on their thoughts on that. And so just all of that input is very important on the organization making a response. Next slide, please. Tools for your plan. So definitely watch the Public Council's Know Your Rights presentation for small businesses and nonprofits. That's very helpful. Connect and work with immigration support organizations like Garesen. We've hosted workshops here. We've been able to connect with them and get questions answered. And so that really helped form our plan. Legal guidance is important. Talk to your board, staff, and community. Stay up to date on the executive orders and policies from trusted sources, because again, that if you're reading those, it gives you a lot of insight. The language gives you a lot of insight on what to expect. Collaboration, none of this would be possible without the many, many organizations that we've been able to partner with. Even when there's sightings, I'm getting a phone call or a text, or understanding trainings or being able to ask questions, it's because we have these partnerships with these other organizations that we're able to get answers and support our team and our community. And then lastly, know and believe that we can fight and we can win. Again, knowing your rights, being prepared, that is political activism. And so I encourage you, I know it's a very scary time, we're all very scared, but we can fight this and we can win this just by knowing our rights and practicing our rights. Next slide, please. I'd like to thank all of these organizations and then some listed here who've given resources and information on how that informed our plan. Slide. I'd also like to just make a couple of announcements. We do have at All People's a Know Your Rights workshop planned for April 10th from 6 to 7:30 p.m. This one specifically will be around health equity and with changes to come given policy to like medical programs such as Medicaid. So we want everyone to be informed on that. Also access to medical testing and things like that for our community. That'll be covered thanks to Clue Justice and Inside Edge Consulting Group. And then when I talked about, fighting and not being afraid, it's important that we're still here and we're a space for our community. So we're also hosting a movie night on March 21st, completely free for the community at 6 p.m. We'll be playing Wicked and Sonic 3. And so we know that times are stressful, and these types of events help our communities feel safe. They do feel safe and secure at our center, and be able to save money. It's going to the movies. So I encourage everyone to spread the word for people to attend, and also support the event and this cause. We are looking for sponsors as it helps us be able to put these things on. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Danny and Brandy, for all of that helpful information. It was important for our partners on this call to see how other organizations, whether they're on school campuses or in our communities, are utilizing the resources and the materials that are available, and also to be able to learn more about how you all are developing and implementing policies for your staff. And thank you, Brandy, so much for the resources that you have shared, the invitations. Danny has also shared Woodcraft Rangers SOPs, their operating procedures with us, and we'll make sure to drop it in the chat before the end of this information session.
Thank you, Rochelle. And I've shared with Jeannie, I shared the how to document, like how to document IE. So I'm sure they'll be sending that out. I also sent essentially a template of our policy. It doesn't have any of our information, but something that people can use, and that's what our board used to vote on, incorporate into our regular policy. And then I also created a list of resources that I use to create our plan. So there's like 20 things on there that includes links and descriptions, as well as the sources of that information.
Thank you. It looks like we have a few questions. The first one that I'm seeing here is how do we sign up for the medical listening session?
More information to come. We've just secured that date, but you could probably stay connected to our social media or our website for the sign up for that. But it is open. It is free for all to attend at our center.
Okay, wonderful. And there's a question related. Will you be talking about medical care for trans youth during your Know Your Rights session?
I don't know that we'll have a specific topic for trans youth. I know that we're going to be generally covering updates to programs like Medicaid and things like that, given the funding issues. So I can't say confidently that we'll have that specific topic.
Okay, thank you. I see that there's another question. I think it's in relation to Danny. Someone asked about who's working on programming for neurodivergent students. That would be Danny from Woodcraft Rangers. Somebody would like to connect with you on that.
Yeah. Hi, Jeannie. I just dropped my email on the chat. And so we do have an inclusion department helping us build out training and support systems to support neurodivergent students.
Wonderful. Thank you, Danny. I think that is it for questions for Danny and Brandy. So we have a little bit of time, and I'm going to turn it back to Jenny so she can introduce our next set of speakers from the Attorney General's office.
Wonderful. So we're stepping into our last phase, overview of California's immigration policies and statewide actions. So I'm going to be introducing our two presenters. Maheen Ahmed currently serves as the Deputy Director for the Office of Community Awareness, Response, and Engagement, or the CARE Office, or department. An office she has crafted and established within the California Department of Justice under the leadership of Attorney General Rob Bonta in 2021 to increase transparency and address barriers to accessing justice. Maheen joined the state legislature in 2016 and became the first Muslim legislative director in the history of the California state legislature in 2019. Maheen has received her bachelor's degree from UC Davis in community and regional development and received her master's degree in public administration from the USC Sol Price School of Public Policy. And she's joined by Jacqueline Gonzalez. Jacqueline Gonzalez is Special Assistant to the Attorney General on Immigration. Most recently, she was the co-founder of Immigrant Defense Advocates, a policy organization focused on protecting immigrant rights at the state level. She began her career as a direct legal service attorney and held leadership positions at various immigrants' rights organizations across the state of California, including Legal Services for Children, the California Collaborative for Immigrant Justice, Centro Legal de la Raza, and Dolores Street Community Services. Jackie received her undergraduate degree from Harvard University and her law degree from UC Berkeley School of Law. So would like to welcome Maheen and Jacqueline.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for having us. I'll be kicking off our presentation today and then handing it over to Jackie. Again, thanks for having us here today to present a little bit about what our office is doing regarding protecting immigrant communities during this time. So first things first, as we're facing a second Trump administration, I would like to reiterate that my boss, Attorney General Rob Bonta for the state of California, is here to provide facts, reasons, and assurances of California's nation-leading protections. Regardless of who is in the White House or Congress, Attorney General Bonta, the California Department of Justice, my colleagues, myself, we're all here for you. And we know that many people in California and across the country are really feeling anxious, scared, sad, and uncertain about this new federal administration. And before I begin to share anything about what we actually are doing, we just really want to share that we're here with you. We stand ready to serve, support, and advocate for all Californians. And as A.G. Bonta says, in California, progress will always prevail. So just to give a little bit of background, we've lived through Trump 1.0. Last time, the California Department of Justice filed more than 120 lawsuits and won the vast majority. We've successfully fought Trump's border wall, preserved DACA, and saved critical state funding. So between Trump 1.0, Project 2025, and the comments that Trump made during the campaign and what he's actually acting upon, DOJ did go into this presidency with a good sense of what to expect, and our teams have been preparing accordingly. That's how the DOJ has been able to take swift action to protect our rights, safety, and future. So just in the first few weeks, the AG has filed multiple lawsuits, specifically those that are impacting immigration issues. I'll share a couple. We sued the Trump administration for trying to end birthright citizenship. A judge quickly granted our temporary restraining order and blocked the executive order while the case proceeds. We've also sued the Trump administration for trying to freeze $3 trillion in critical federal funding. Again, a judge quickly blocked the freeze and granted our motion to enforce when Trump didn't fully comply with the court order. And we have to see what challenges will be coming and how we'll need to respond within the bounds of the law and authority of the office. But you can be sure that we'll be ready. And be it through new legislation, litigation in courts, or through responding to executive orders, we're going to continue to protect and defend every single Californian. A couple of the resources we have, a few of the presenters before already mentioned, and I really want to make sure that you all know where you can find these resources. These are specific to immigrant communities and families and organizations, like many that you are all part of. So they can be found on our website. It's oag.ca.gov/immigrant/resources. I'm going to put this in the chat. And this is our one-stop shop for a lot of basically everything that we are putting out to support you all regarding immigration. Just to kind of list off some of the things that you'll find there. You'll find know your immigration rights information, protecting yourself from immigration scams, guidances. We have all types of guidances, some of which are for public institutions and best practices in avoiding the use of state and local resources to support civil immigration enforcement, guidances for immigrant students and families, bulletins and guidance to assist state and local law enforcement agencies, prosecutors, and defense counsel in complying with the state law, regardless of changes that are coming from the Trump administration. So that's just a couple of the things that we've put out for you to read over, and hopefully they're helpful to you. We also, in January, we hosted a virtual community briefing regarding our immigration resources. This was to make sure that we have another resource available that can really summarize the work that we have, and we have that in English and in Spanish. It can be found on our website. I'll share that again in the chat after this. And so those resources, we hope that you find benefit from, and we'll continue to be posting new resources on there if we have any that come out. And then lastly, in anticipation of the Trump administration, we held a series of 5 immigrant rights regional convenings across the state to share our office's resources and engage directly with organizations, advocates, and community members across the state. We learned directly from a lot of the community leaders about what the communities we are serving at this time need. And so we're hoping to incorporate that in the work that we continue to do, not only at the Office of Care, but in the DOJ as a whole. So that's just some information background on setting up what we do at the DOJ, what we've done, and what we continue to do. I will hand it over to Jackie to talk a little bit more about sanctuary states. I can't hear you, Jackie. Try again.
You might be muted on your computer, maybe, instead of Zoom.
Meanwhile, I've just put the link for the immigrant resources onto the chat for everyone to see, and we hope that you can find benefit from it. Still can't hear you, Jackie. Sorry.
Can you check the settings of the microphone on Zoom?
This is just some time for you all to open the link that I sent and take a look at our amazing resources.
And it might also give you some time to add some questions into the chat if you have any pressing questions.
Is this any better?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, I think it was linked to the wrong thing. My apologies. Maheen has, I'm new to the office, so still working internally and externally through some of these hiccups. So thank you for your patience. But I want to start off first by thanking the organizers. My name is Jackie. I am a Special Assistant Attorney General at the DOJ, and together with Maheen and the Care Department, we are really grateful for this invitation. And I can say I've learned a lot in the past hour. So thank you to the other presenters as well. I do want to touch, as Maheen mentioned, on the issue of sanctuary and what it means to be a sanctuary state here in California and the implications of that for sanctuary and non-sanctuary cities. So first, I want to acknowledge that the term sanctuary can have a lot of different meanings. There's actually not one clear definition when that word gets used and thrown around that we are all operating on. But I want to be clear about what we're talking about today and for California. So during Trump 1.0, California passed a law some of you may know very well called SB 54. It is referred to most often as the California Values Act, and that is our sanctuary law in California. It was signed into law on October 5th, 2017, and went into effect January 1st, 2018. So this was during, the height of the first administration. And without going through that law in a very detailed and boring fashion, because it's quite complex, I view it as having two goals. One, that's to ensure that state and local resources go toward protecting public safety in California communities and not toward federal immigration enforcement. And two, that public spaces like schools, hospitals, courthouses, among others, and other places we've discussed today remain safe spaces for everyone in the community. So some of the things that SB 54 does provide is that police and sheriffs, for example, cannot ask someone just out of the blue about their immigration status. Police and sheriffs here in California, unlike other states, they can't just arrest someone only because they have a prior deportation order, or honestly, for most other immigration violations, they cannot use immigration enforcement agents as interpreters. They cannot share personal information like somebody's home address with immigration enforcement agents unless that information is already publicly available. The reality is, unfortunately, that California, it can't block federal agencies from conducting immigration enforcement, which I'm sure many of you have seen, unfortunately, perhaps experienced, but there is still a lot that the law can do. And specifically, except in very, very narrow circumstances, state and local law enforcement can't use taxpayer money to enforce federal immigration law. So from our perspective, the federal government is free to do their job. We can't interfere and get in the way of that, but they can't force the state of California to help them carry out what we perceive to be an inhumane mass deportation agenda. So our expectation from the Attorney General is that all local law enforcement agencies in our state will comply with this law, with our sanctuary law. And as we've been seeing, a lot of local cities, counties, localities have been passing their own, sanctuary laws. And any law that a locality or city passes has to be in compliance with SB 54. And this is an issue that we continue to monitor at the Cal DOJ very closely. This means that cities, they're free to pass them, but they can't conflict with what SB 54 says. So I know there's been a lot of rhetoric recently regarding SB 54. And one message that we really want to get across to the community is that President Trump challenged SB 54 in court during the first term, and he lost. He lost at court. So the case went all the way up to the Supreme Court, and they ruled that SB 54 is a proper exercise of our state power under the United States Constitution in California. Until, and hopefully it won't, but until that changes, that is good and sound law. And the Department of Justice, the California Department of Justice, will continue to use it to the full extent possible to defend immigrant communities in California. And so this leads to the second point of, one of the goals of SB 54, and which I think has been really the theme of the presentation today by most people, which is really making sure that the public places like schools, hospitals, courthouses, places that our communities access for services remain safe spaces for people in the community. And as you've heard others mention, and this is actually something that is mandated by SB 54, that we as the California Department of Justice and the Attorney General issue model policies and guidance on these places. For this reason, in December 2024, Attorney General Bonta issued updated guidance to help staff develop practical plans. And I don't want to repeat, my colleagues, but, these spaces do cover a lot of critical places that some folks on this call may be joining. Of course, there are always other resources like the ones that the other presenters have shared. These guidelines primarily outline relevant federal and state protections for all individuals seeking access to the public institution. So you might find them to be perhaps even more detailed than you might want, but it certainly will hopefully answer a lot of the questions that you may have. It does provide policy recommendations for how to comply with federal and state laws. And that may mitigate disruptions from immigration enforcement at your institutions. And then finally, it lists model policies that may be adopted. I know others have shared samples of, what's a judicial warrant, what's an ICE immigration administrative warrant, and I believe those materials will be shared, but I do want to just point out that a lot of these model policies and guidances in the appendices section of them go through these different warrants and have samples for your reference. So while they are tailored to a lot of public institutions, really any institution that is accessible to the public can choose to adopt similar policies to these to protect the rights and safety of people visiting, their location. So like Maheen began, I really just want to close and reiterate that we know these are really challenging times. For us, regardless of who's in the White House, we just want you to know that the California Attorney General, the department, Maheen, her colleagues, myself, we are fighting every day to protect you, the communities that you serve. I will just share personally, I was an immigration attorney, as you heard from my bio, for many years and during Trump 1.0, and I have a deep appreciation for how challenging the work is for you all on the front lines, how scary it is for the people coming to seek services from you. We want them to continue to do that. And we want you to know that we value and appreciate your work. And we're here always to offer our partnership and support you as best we can. So thank you again for the invitation and for all of the work that you do every day.
I just wanted to, before we go into Q&A, put the resources again in the chat. We also wanted to mention, if you have, if you're witnessing any concerning immigration related activity, such as like any sort of like ICE raids or anything that you would like to inform us at the DOJ about, we have a devoted email. It's immigration@doj.ca.gov. We don't necessarily like respond to things to that email, but it's just to inform us so that we could better understand what is going on the ground. So I'll put that in the chat, as well as link our website again that has all the resources. And if you do want to get in contact with me and my team, we have community outreach managers across the state. You can see that on our website. You can also reach out to our Office of Care, and I'll put the email address for that in the chat right now. Thank you again.
Thank you so much, both of you, for that information, and certainly for, fighting the good fight at the state level. We all greatly appreciate that you're setting out those protections for all of the children and families throughout the state. I just want to give some folks a little more time to jot some questions in the chat. Oh, I am seeing a couple now. I know that there's one question, I think you, Jackie, raised it before you began to speak, and that was the difference between sanctuary and non-sanctuary cities. You may have touched on it. I apologize if you did, but if you can maybe share so folks can better understand the distinction, because I know about a month ago, I heard there was a city in Orange County, I believe, where they very much said something along the lines of, we're going to cooperate with the federal government if they're coming to come into our city. So certainly there are sanctuary and non-sanctuary cities throughout the state. So what are the implications for that and the distinctions?
Yeah, let me try to address that. So just to reiterate, California as a state is a sanctuary state as defined, I will say that, as defined by SB 54, right? Because there's no established definition. SB 54 does have some exceptions in the law that permit cooperation. There are some narrow exceptions. A lot of the rhetoric and a lot of the comments that we're hearing are localities that are focused on, when they can comply. But regardless of whether a locality identifies themselves as sanctuary or not sanctuary, the law of California is SB 54. So every locality, no matter what they call themselves, sanctuary or not sanctuary, has to follow California's sanctuary law. There are locations that may choose to go further than California's law, and some have. but no one can do less. So maybe that's the simplest way to think about it, that every place in California has to follow SB 54 as a baseline. And there may be places where other protections go further for the immigrant community, but they cannot be less than SB 54.
Great, that was helpful. I don't believe we have any other questions. Folks, team, are there any other questions?
Yes, I'm seeing one is the email that Maheen mentioned, is it only for them to report on raids or the presence of ICE at a workplace?
And Maheen answered, she said both.
Yeah, anything that you think is important for us to know about ICE in our communities, please feel free to share that at the email address.
Wonderful, thank you. And I think with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Jenny to help close out this space. But I just, for me and from our team, I just want to say a big thank you to all of our presenters. They shared such critical information and resources. We're truly grateful for you being here. Go ahead, Jenny.
Yes, and talking about resources, so we will be, like I mentioned, sharing this deck, and we will have these additional slides on additional resources that we've been gathering as we've been collaborating with different offices, departments. So for example, this Community Investment for Families Department deck is going to have these resources where the City of LA was able to replicate these red cards in more languages than maybe some websites have. So we'll be sharing this. And in the next slide, in the chat, I'll be sharing this website. A lot of folks have been looking for resources. In Superintendent Tony Thurman's website, where he shares like a reminder of the obligation of schools and charters. When you scroll down, and if I could go to the next slide, you'll see a list of resources by the state, kind of like regions. So you'll see resources from the North region. In the next slide, you'll see resources in the from the Central region. In the following slide, you'll see resources from the Southern region. And hopefully that's helpful in supporting the work that you all are doing and in providing you all with more connections. The last slide that I'll share when it comes to resources, I'm going to be inviting Jana Luft from Partnership for Children and Youth. We also work with PCY, and they are supporting with creating this landing page with further resources. So if I can get Jana to provide a little bit more context. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you so much. This has been such important and rich conversation today. And as Jeannie was saying, we at Partnership for Children and Youth are recognizing that folks really need resources right now to help support your staff with navigating the current context and be able to support the youth and families and communities you all serve, as well as meet the needs of your staff who are impacted. And so I'm going to drop into the chat a landing page that we've created. This is just a starting point of resources. So we will also be adding in all the resources shared today and continue to create multiple places where you can easily go and try to sort, I'm looking for something to help my families know their rights. I'm looking for something to help my staff with mental health resources. How do we support each other through this time? So there's also, you'll see a place where you can email additional resources that you think others might benefit from, and we'll add them to the page as well. Thank you so much.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you so much for that addition. And as we close our space together, we wanted to acknowledge that there's a lot of heartache right now. There's a lot of hardship. There's a lot of difficulty. And as Maya Angelou does in these two quotes, would like to also thank you all for standing in courage and standing in hope and holding on to that hope alongside us. There's a lot of amazing work happening at the day-to-day individual levels with conversations with students at the organizational level, creating safe spaces for staff at the community level, with advocacy, and at the city, county, state level. So just want to thank you all so much for choosing to be a part of our community, for supporting each other, and we hope to continue to make additional spaces like these for you all, so that we can make sure that we move alongside each other, and continue to build safe spaces for our communities. With that, we're launching a exit poll. It's only about 3 questions. It should only take a couple of minutes. Would love your insight to whether this was a helpful space, and if there's any other ways that we can continue to support you all. So you should be able to see the sorry, the poll, and it should only take a couple minutes. So thank you all so much for taking your time to answer the 3 questions that we have. And as we mentioned, we will be following up with an email. So if you attended the session, we have your email recorded. If you RSVP'd and are part of our network, we will be getting these resources to you all after that. So with that, thank you all so much. And we hope you have a wonderful rest of your Friday and a wonderful weekend as well. Like Rochelle mentioned, thank you to our presenters, who came from all walks of life to support our efforts as well. We really appreciate you all taking time to prep and share the information that you shared today.